What if I told you that every few years, India's power demand grows by the equivalent of an entire European country? And that's only the beginning. Over the next 5 years, India is expected to add as much electricity demand as Germany consumes in an entire year. And then comes the next big customer, artificial intelligence. Electricity demand from data centers is expected to increase at least tenfold by 2030. My guests today are Praveer Sinha, the CEO and Managing Director of Tata Power, India's largest private sector electricity company.
Already nearly 40 gigawatt to 50 gigawatt of solar power is not being scheduled. We need to come out of that curtailment mind frame and have 100%, because after all, you are generating power. It's pure money which is being wasted, pure energy which is being wasted.
And Mohit Bhargava, Country Director at the India Energy and Climate Center at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. Mohit has previously led the green energy arm of NTPC, which is India's largest state-owned power company.
We need to look at or focus on technologies or sources which are inherently within our control. So a lot of it will happen when we start decarbonizing the industry.
Okay.
A big chunk will happen with the AI.
So here is the question. Can India's power system keep up with the needs of not just households and industry, but the energy demands of the AI economy? I'm Menaka Doshi. Welcome to Emerging, where we dive deep into how the world's most exciting rising economies are shaping the global future. Praveer, Mohit, welcome to Emerging. I want to start by asking you about what a crazy summer this has been, Praveer. What did it take to make sure that India kept running through this incredible intensity of heat waves?
Such a pleasure to come and talk to you about India's power sector. As you rightly mentioned, that the capacity addition in India has been growing at a very fast pace. And just to give you some data points, turn of the century, 2000, we were just 100 gigawatt. 2010, we were something like 200 plus. And now in 2026, we are at 530 gigawatts. So that's the type of capacity addition that is happening. And the capacity addition is happening because of three reasons. One is that the aspirational India wants to grow, and more people use electrical equipments and have more electrical gadgets. The second is the climate change which is happening. And you mentioned about this summer being extreme heat waves, temperatures going up to 50 degrees in many places. And we are expecting that especially the air conditioning and cooling load will increase over next 20-25 years. So India's power growth is something which we see consistently going up, and we expect this to increase now that a lot of data centers and AI centers are coming up, and a lot of other related commercial activity, industrial activity. So I think it's a good issue for India. Indian industry has done exceedingly well. India has added capacity, and I do feel that the India's power sector, and especially the private sector in India, will continue to contribute to a very large extent.
Praveer, are you saying that this summer was a breeze?
Yeah, absolutely. No,
At no point did you feel like, because it's like you said, whilst temperatures may be something India is familiar with at 48 degrees or 50 degrees Celsius, the air conditioning demand has been climbing quite rapidly over the last few years, right? So did you feel that there was any point in the summer where it was touch and go, that, we could be facing very large blackouts?
I don't think so. We have enough reserve capacity with us. And while for one day it went to 271 gigawatt, it has been in the range of about 250 to 260. And we have been able to cater to that requirement. So it's not that we are absolutely hand to mouth. We have huge capacity adds that have happened in last few years. Daytime, in fact, we have so much of excess energy. Many a times during the day, the power cost goes down to 1 rupee. In fact, in some hours, it has gone to 0. So I don't think India is today starved of power, and the way the capacity adds are happening now. Last year we added 55 gigawatts, so it's a huge capacity add that has taken place. We will be able to cater to the growing need. Of course, we need to do the balancing of the generation. Right now, most of it is renewable, but how do you make it firm? Battery storage, pump storage, some of those actions needs to be taken. But I think we are ready to meet the future challenges.
That's not something you could have said of India's power sector maybe, 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But we've come a long way whilst relying on coal.
But I think I want to add one simple point to what peak demand discussion is happening. You see, the fact is we are very focused on the peak number, which incidentally happens during the daytime. It happened at about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And I think 2 or 3 times at around 2:33, we have had 268, 270 kind of number. The problem, which probably Praveer ji may accept, is the evening. During the daytime, we have almost 100 gigawatts of solar coming to the system, which, as you rightly said, enables surplus power during the daytime. But if we are hitting 250 gigawatts in the evening when the sun is down and wind is very intermittent, we get it only a few months in a year, then we are actually heavily breathing, because then the entire load has to be met from all the so-called conventional or the legacy systems, as you said, coal, hydro, nuclear, whatever there is. Yeah. And in some cases, what we know is that we've also used gas to meet that requirement. So the larger challenge, and that is something we tend to miss quite often, is the fact that it's not the peak demand number during the day which matters. It's the peak demand during the non-solar hours, which is more relevant, because then we have to ensure, even if it's 250 gigawatts, that's a huge number to meet. And which is why I think what the government is doing, that they have set out very clear targets, whether it's for coal, nuclear, renewables, and hydro also. But the fact remains that is where the gap is. I would put out my neck and say that if we actually need do 270 in the evening, that would be something worth, because at 250, meeting 250 in the evening was a stretch. We had literally every horse running at that point of time. So that's a challenge. But yes, you're right. India has relied on coal because as far as I see, it's economics. For us, coal was there, coal is cheap, coal is abundant. So it makes sense. And every country, every geography across the world has done that. So when people, particularly the Western media or the Western people talk, or lecture us, if I may use the word, on trying to push coal, all we are trying to do is trying to get whatever is the cheapest source available.
So we're still at 70% coal, right, Mohit?
Yeah, but what's important is directionally, the government is very clear. We are not saying we'll keep on adding coal for eternity. We're also setting very, very ambitious targets for renewables. Government, in fact, also set very ambitious targets for nuclear, which is probably a bit too early to set now. But yes, we need to do that because nuclear also is ultimately clean. But the fact is that coal has been our mainstay, and it will remain a very strong pillar going forward. I'll probably not be able to give a number whether 25 years down the line we'll still have. But I sense that even in 2070, it may not be totally zero. Maybe some coal might still stay. But by then, this entire energy supply mix would dramatically reverse to have much larger share of clean supply into the system. The scale at which we are doing renewables and the cost at which India is doing renewables is probably among the cheapest in the world. India is endowed with hugely good solar insulation.
Right.
And what that means is we get sun on large parts of the country for almost 300 to 350 days in a year. What that means is that we can actually do a huge amount of solar. The problem with solar being that you can't use it during the evening, non-solar hours. So we need to invest heavily in battery. And what our research has shown that today we can actually do a base load supply, which is what we call, we can supply electricity on 24/7 basis as per the demand. If we use solar and storage, they are today the lowest cost option available as compared to all other sources.
What is the time distance between where we are today and us hitting, say, 270 gigawatts of peak demand in the evening? How long do you think it will take for India to get there?
Oh, that might happen in the next 2 years.
In the next 2 years.
Mohit mentioned about solar and storage. Another big aspect in India is wind energy.
Right.
And the wind has a different generation profile compared to solar. Most of the wind starts coming late afternoon around 3 o'clock and goes up to midnight. And that also has substantial potential to supplement the solar and the battery storage. We've done some solutions and we find that through the day, if I have to only depend on renewable, I can, with solar and wind, meet 70% requirement. And this is through the day for every hour. If I have to do 90%, I bring solar, wind, and battery storage. I can also bring pump storage. So 90% of the time, clean energy I can provide every 15-minute slot through the day.
So let me see if I understood this correctly. You're saying pan-India.
Yes.
90% of India's power requirement today can be met through renewable sources if you include battery storage.
Yeah, if you bring that sort of capacity. Today, that capacity is not there.
What is the outlook on demand?
So we are today at about, in terms of energy use, when we say in terawatt hours.
Right.
I think we use about 1600 terawatt hours.
Okay.
That was the number, I think 24, 25. The expectation is that based on the demand projections and the various modelings, that by 2050, in various scenarios, that number would be between 6,500 terawatt hours to 8,000 terawatt hours. This accounts for AI also. And just to give you a sense, bulk of this will happen not because of data center, because data centers are, while important, but lot will happen because of electrification of the use of energy. Today, electrification is about 15% of the energy use. Even with very conservative estimates, people say that we should move towards a 30% number. China, I believe, is closer to around 40% in terms of energy use. And this has become very, very important, particularly when you saw the Iran war. You had, supply problems for LPG, LNG, even oil, and then consequently fertilizer and so on and so forth. So if we want to move towards a state where we are energy secured, where we are energy independent, we need to look at or focus on technologies or sources which are inherently within our control. So a lot of it will happen when we start decarbonizing the industry. So the bulk of growth will happen there. A big chunk will happen with the AI. A big chunk will also happen because of cooling load.
Which is air conditioning. Okay, I want to talk about supply. I'm going to come to Praveer, you first. If you look at the entire gamut of supply, from financing to equipment, generation, transmission, technology, regulation, bird's eye view, where are we the strongest and what do you consider the weakest points that need urgent addressing?
So when we look at the power sector, there is a business of generation, there is a business of transmission, and there is a business of distribution. And then, of course, the data part of it, the technology. Now, when we look at our generation, we have adequate capacity in the country, whether it is for conventional generation or it is for the new generation, which is wind or solar. We've made huge investments in the country in last few years on solar, especially solar module and cell. Most of the things we manufacture in India, and I think we are quite ready. The challenge is, we talked about battery storage, and that's where we are still dependent on importing the cells from China. We need to work on that and see how we can manufacture the cell, and also the raw material that gets into it. Of course, we are now looking at not just the lithium technology, but there are many other chemistries where work is happening. I do know that some of the sodium batteries and manganese batteries are in very advanced stage. In next 2-3 years, we will get some which will be commercially viable and scalable. That is required, especially for stationary applications for power systems. We are on transmission again quite ready. We have the best technology, whether it is the 765 kV systems or the HVDC system. Of course, there is a cost aspect because economies of scale has to come. Coming to distribution, again, we have a lot of capacity in the country. There is one aspect that needs to work in distribution. most of the states, out of 28 states, 27 states are still under the government-run system. They have huge financial losses. They are nearly 7 lakh crores of losses, which is, I think, about $70 billion of losses, which is there. They need to sort that out because until unless they sort it out, where do you get the money for upgrading the system, upgrading the technology? And that's a very weak area, and that is the area the reform has to happen, and then only investment will take place and some of the newer technologies will get implemented. So I think on an overall basis, we are quite geared up. We have enough capacity. We have also capability of people to set up these plants. So, last decade, most of the time we were setting up about 10 to 12 gigawatt per year. Last year we did 50. So I think we are setting the pace of capacity addition. There has been some delays in transmission lines because the transmission line always follows the generation. Better planning needs to be done, and better the so-called green corridors and others need to be created in advance rather than waiting for the generation to be finalized. And I think that will be so that there is a hub and spoke arrangement for the transmission system. So there is a lot of capability in the country, and wherever it is not there, I think government is pushing the Indian manufacturers, Indian companies. In fact, we have the best of the global companies working in India and working for a very long period of time. So India is quite geared up for not only supplying electricity, but also the supply chain that is required for setting up these plants. And of course, the challenge in India always is that in a democracy, acquiring land and getting permits and permission.
Mohit, I was under the impression that we need to choose between dedicating resources towards power generation or adding to capacity versus upgrading the grid, and this seems to be a tough choice that many other countries are facing as well. Praveer says, no, we have the resources to manage all of this. Would you agree?
So if you're talking about financial resources...
I'm talking about all kinds of resources.
Yeah.
I mean, even equipment is a challenge, right?
No, equipment is a challenge, but I think he will probably also agree that, the pace at which we want to do. So, hypothetically, if you look at, for example, the high voltage transformers, high capacity transformers. So these are very large equipments. You need at least 3 years to churn out one piece, if I'm not wrong. So if you, for example, need 400 pieces of those transformers, you won't get them tomorrow. So there has to be some kind of a queue, although there are at least 4 or 5 large manufacturers in the country. Having said that, I totally agree with him. But one of the points which is important is, and I think I take the cue from what you said, traditionally what has happened, we used to believe that if I have to spend 100 rupees in developing the power sector, 50 would go to generation, and then 25 would go to transmission and distribution. Now what has happened is, it's actually 1:1:1. So if I have to spend 100 rupees, 33 is how it happens, because the need and the cost of generation, while it has actually come down in absolute numbers, transmission has gone up and distribution has also gone up. Why? Because we need to do a lot more transmission now. Why? Because we need to have in place systems which are able to, the grid needs to respond. Ultimately, whatever the generator does, they will follow what the grid operator says, and grid operator needs to have adequate control in terms of security, stability for the grid. So, which is why it's important that we spend the right amount of money. Transmission being the biggest challenge nowadays, what we hear is because largely, one, of course, land is a challenge for everyone. But in transmission, because these are linear projects, so the right of way becomes a very, very significant challenge. And this is something which requires serious intervention by the government, by the players. But even then, there are multiple cases where even availability of that footprint for a tower, which is not coming up, holds up the entire line, which is why the planning on transmission and execution on transmission needs to actually lead. It should not be follower. It should be the leader in terms of how systems are developed.
Right. Is this a challenge unique to India? Because I read about this, as a challenge, let's say, even in Brazil or even in Vietnam.
It's everywhere.
That
I mean,
transmission is far lagging, the addition of power generation
you need to understand
capacities.
the size of the grid we're talking about.
Right.
Brazil and Vietnam are nowhere close to what we are in terms of the capacity and the dispatch of power. A probably larger use case is either Europe, where not much development is happening, or US. Just as an example, although US is much larger than us, but AI has created so much demand for power there. The connectivity queue, which we refer to, in India, it's about 4 to 5 years. So, for example, if I want to set up a power plant, I go to the transmission authority. So they will say, okay, I'll give you transmission, but that will be ready 4 years down the line. In USA, that number is 15 to 20 years.
One more thing that I think is one of the biggest complexity that is coming in the power system is that you have multiple suppliers of power. So we earlier used to have large generating power systems, large transmission line. Everything was linear, unidirectional. Now you have multiple generations and multiple suppliers of power. So your grid has become very, very unstable.
Okay. So a weak transmission system not only means that power will not be supplied to the areas that where we are seeing demand, but can it significantly hurt the entire economics of the industry? And the reason I ask is, for instance, we saw over the course of the last year significant curtailment of solar power, which is that solar power was available, but the grid could not evacuate it for a variety of reasons. I believe on some days, close to 40% of solar power output was denied access to the national network. Now, as a solar power generator, that's project economics for you, right? You're generating, but you're not able to, sort of sell it or make revenue off it. So I'm curious to know what is at risk here if we're not able to upgrade our transmission systems quickly enough? And how long will it take for us to have a truly modern transmission system? Praveer, you want to go first and then we talk about this?
As Mohit also mentioned, that we need to have the lead. So there are two parts. The first part is the inherent ability of the grid to evacuate that much of power. So we had a challenge that grids were not ready. Lines were made, but some of the transmission towers could not come. So there has been a series of delays in various projects which have happened. I think it's very important that we design and do an excess capacity in transmission as we have done in generation and other areas. So that's an area that has not been done to a large extent. The transmission system per se was earlier, everything was controlled by one single agency. Now, of course, you have allowed private sector to come in, but the speed at which they have to come has not kept pace, and that has to happen very quickly. We are still behind schedule on that. Already nearly 40 gigawatt to 50 gigawatt of solar power is not being scheduled. We need to come out of that curtailment mind frame and have 100%, because after all, you are generating power. It's pure money which is being wasted, pure energy which is being wasted.
If you think now's the time, I could actually say that we have given two very simple solutions to the government, and one of which has already been implemented. It's no rocket science. So typically what happens with the solar power, it generates only during daytime, and it is connected to a transmission system. But the transmission system is not being used beyond the solar hours. So the simplest solution and the lowest hanging fruit, if I may say so, was that why not connect a battery to this place, along with, if required, some more solar at that location, and use the transmission line beyond the solar hours. The next step obviously is, I understand already about 100 gigawatts of application for supply during non-solar hours have been submitted by various people. The government needs to clear them, because what that will do, as a system, the biggest pain point we have is meeting the peak demand. So that was one. The second is also a more technical solution, and which has again started implementation. That is to what we call as reconductoring. I mean, you replace the existing transmission wire or the conductor with a new high capacity conductor. India has already started manufacturing. What that does is you again elevate the problem of finding or setting up a new transmission line and start using that for transmit double the power what you can do now.
Okay, I want to go back to the battery storage bit that both of you have referenced. If I understand this correctly, the future is hybrid power, right? Which is a mix of solar, wind, thermal, and renewable now coming with battery storage. And pump storage, yes. And you spoke of pump storage being even more effective than battery storage. How do you see the next few years evolve? Because we've already started doing auctions for the supply of power in a hybrid fashion, right? We've seen prices decline as well. So describe to me what this future of hybrid power is going to look like, at least over the course of the next 2 to 5 years.
So the challenge is that we put everything into the bidding process and e-auction, and the prices have declined, but the prices of batteries have gone up in China. So many of these projects will not come, and that is the challenge today. And just to give you an idea, that today there is nearly 70 gigawatt of PPAs which are signed.
Which is power purchase agreements.
Yeah, signed in the sense the central agencies of the government have tied up that power, but there are no buyers for that power. No state discom, no one is buying that because they feel that they do not have a requirement of that power. So today, the biggest challenge is that many of these projects are not coming because one is they don't have the transmission line approval. And secondly, the bids have gone at such a low price that many of them will not see light of the day.
But then who is bidding at such low prices if they're unable to afford or build?
So what happens is many of the people, they think that the prices which were coming down will further come down, little realizing that the prices comes down, but after a certain stage. We have seen that in China where the prices of batteries have gone up in last 4 months. The devaluation of currency has happened from 85 to 94, 95.
But what's also one added point which I may add here is that up till now the central agencies were the leaders in doing these auctions, reverse auctions too, and that had become a default way to get into the system, which is why you asked who are these people who are bidding these low rates. So everyone felt that if I create a portfolio of 500 megawatt to 1000 megawatt through these auctions, I create a good market cap for me and I can probably cash out at some point of time. But what is happening now, this was aided to a large extent by two things. One was the waiver of transmission charges at the federal level. For renewables, government had said, which is now tapering down and will be over in the next 2 years. And the second was a renewable purchase obligation, which the government had said all the states and buyers must need to follow. So with the going away of the transmission charge waiver for the central lines, most of these purchases will start moving towards the states, because then states will decide what I want to buy and they will say, why not set up the power plant in my state? Why should I unnecessarily pay for transmission for wheeling in power from, say, Rajasthan to Andhra Pradesh or Telangana or Karnataka? They'll say, why not set up here? Because I will not pay for that unnecessary transmission line, which is also, I don't know when it will come. If you set it up in my state, I can get it up as soon as possible. So that is a major shift which is happening, which is why the auction trajectory at the central level has gone down drastically.
Okay.
So the future is when these auctions may happen largely at the state level. There might still be a few auctions at the federal level, because some states might say, okay, we are happy to buy power which is renewable power set up in Rajasthan or Gujarat or some other large state, and probably take that to my state. But many of these states will actually say, I'll do my own auctions, I'll buy. That actually suits the sellers also, because when a state does an auction, there is certainty that that fellow will sign a power purchase agreement as soon as the auctions are done, because they know there is much more certainty in this auction.
Okay, but the future is hybrid.
Yeah, future is absolutely hybrid. And I think...
and nuclear?
Yeah.
Okay, how far are we from nuclear becoming a meaningful part of this mix, especially by private companies like yours, because nuclear has been largely a state domain so far?
Absolutely right. And I think the first step was taken when the Shanti bill came, and it allows private sector and also the insurance part of it is being taken care. However, the rules have still not come, and let me tell you that there are three aspects in nuclear which needs to be sorted out. One, of course, you require land and a lot of water, but apart from that, you need a technology. And when we are talking about a small modular reactor, today the technology is not available. Global players, the biggest in the US or in France and other places, or in Korea and Japan, they are still developing these so-called SMR technologies, which requires a lot of regulatory approval. It requires the international or the local atomic energy regulatory boards and their permissions and all that. So that is still work in progress. The second is how do you bring the fuel, which is in this case uranium. How do you bring that? Buying fuel is more of a government to government arrangement, and how do you get that sort of and how do you get visibility of it for 10 years, 20 years? Because you can't set up a nuclear plant and after 10 years find that you're not able to source the fuel, and what sort of pricing would be there. The third is what do you do with the spent fuel and the reprocessing of it. So these are three areas which needs to be first sorted out, and a better visibility has to be there. Of course, the whole approval process itself is a very long process of getting the land and ensuring that the land is good for setting up. So it should not be an earthquake prone area and various other technical and geotechnical requirements of the land.
How far away are we from nuclear becoming a meaningful part of the mix?
I think we are talking about a 10-year period.
Okay, all right. Now I want to talk about how all of this that we've discussed gets impacted by the need for power for AI. And I'm not sure you all have all modeled this in as, as robustly as where AI stands today. And to sort of get to the heart of it, I'd love to start talking about the Google experiment, as we call it, where Google has committed $15 billion to build an AI hub in India to serve India's needs, but also to serve Google's needs across the world or across the region. And to do that, it is not only going to set up captive power, but it has also just been granted a deemed distribution license. Explain to me the kind of pressure AI is going to put on the power estimates that you all have shared so far, and what do you make of this Google experiment and how it's going to work?
So right now in the country, we have about 1.5 gigawatt of supply which goes to data centers. With whatever has been announced, we are expecting that this will become about 10 gigawatt by 2030 and about 30 gigawatt by 2035. So that's the type of number that now from 1.5 to 10 is not a great number. Mohit will agree that we'll be able to cater to that. Even 30 gigawatt by 2035 is not a great number. We'll be able to handle this.
Okay, so the volume of power required might not really test, sort of India's capabilities, but the nature of power required, the steadiness of power required, as everyone seems to be making out the case of data centers and AI, the ability to sort of ensure that 24/7 supply, is that going to test how we've sort of been talking about power so far?
So I again don't think that's very difficult. We live in a city of Mumbai. Tata Power has been supplying power in Mumbai for last 111 years. We do the whole 100% transmission. My availability over here is 99.999. 6 times. So we will be able to cater to that. And in power systems, we always build a redundancy. So there is a N-1 supply, N-2 supply, N-3 supply. So you will have enough of backup supplies which will be there to ensure that there is 24/7 and the quality of power also is good. So, but we need to design that. We need to ensure that there are dedicated lines, backup lines and all that. As far as you mentioned about the deemed license, the Google experiment is because they give a deemed license, then as a distribution company, you don't have to pay the cross-subsidy charges. Now, when you do renewable projects and you are buying power, you need to pay cross-subsidy charges to the grid. Here, you will not have to pay cross-subsidy because you are a deemed licensee and you can buy that power. And some of the cross-subsidy surcharge or the other surcharges that one has to pay, you don't have to. So that's it protects. Also, it gives you the freedom that within your campus or within your area, you can have your own network. You can bring the last mile connectivity from the grid to yourself. And to that extent, it gives you the flexibility of arranging power and making it more competitive compared to the otherwise industrial power that you would have consumed.
Assuming there will be humongous demand for data centers, given AI adoption, across the country, do you expect that most of them will rely on captive power and on this sort of deemed distribution license, thereby remaining entirely or almost off grid and building their own parallel power structures, to the national grid?
So our point of view is slightly different from what Praveer has on AI data centers. We feel they are likely to be bigger than 30 gigawatts. May not be in 2035.
AI demand, you're saying, is going to be bigger than 30
because India is actually very uniquely positioned in terms of supplying power. And India is also uniquely positioned in the sense that we can do RE-based supply at much larger scale to these data centers, because what we understand from the limited interactions we've had with most of these people, their requirement is like today.
Yeah.
They are keen to have the supply starting in the next 18 months. They don't want to wait for the next 5 years to set up a coal-based or whatever kind of power supply. They want it. So RE is very
renewable energy.
Renewable is actually the one which can do that in the shortest time frame. And incidentally, as per our research, that's also the lowest cost, whether you look at it on a 24/7 flat block basis or as an intermittent supply. So we feel that data centers could be a big business opportunity in India. Of course, I mean, assuming that they will all comply with the Government of India regulations for storage of data and so on and so forth.
So that brings me maybe to the final question. How do you imagine what the grid of 2035, 2045 will look like?
So the whole power sector is going through a huge transformation. And this transition has many components. One is we will have a lot of people going for rooftop. And when I talk about rooftop, it's not just houses, but it is also commercial establishments, it is industries which will do. We today have in our country 25 gigawatt of rooftop. By 2030, this is expected to become 60 gigawatt. And we expect that this will actually become more than 100 gigawatt crossing in 2035. So that's the type of number that we are talking. And that means people are generating their own electricity, consuming themselves, and are giving it to the grid. The second is there will be a lot of technology changes that will happen. The third is, again, Mohit mentioned about reconductoring. So superconductors are being developed. So the same line can have not twice, but 6 times, 10 times the quantum of power that can flow in that conductor. So that is the type of work that is happening. The fourth that is happening is you will have huge amount of chemistries of batteries, and will not only be banking on just lithium, but they will be. And then there are other technologies even in manufacturing of solar modules. There are peroxides and other technologies. So I think the type of shift that we are seeing is humongous. The second shift that we are saying is in the way the energy is being consumed by the consumers, where they will have a choice of consuming it in different times of the year, times of the day. Load shifting will happen in a very, very big way, whereby you will not charge electric batteries during daytime when you have peak power. You will do it midnight to early morning, or you will do it during periods you have excess energy. The days will be gone when we will have monopoly of utilities. It will be a very distributed system. Some of the work that we are doing, like you have UPI for payment, each one of you will have a simple app through which you can decide how much of power you will consume during the day, which hours of the day you can consume. Similarly, you will have an app which will give you the freedom to buy power from anyone. So
and
you
sell power.
and sell power. So you, as a consumer, you can produce power and sell. They have coined a new word, prosumer, for that, and you will every day know exactly that how much of money you have made in terms of the selling of power and what is the type of saving. So I think it will become very interactive.
So I'll probably add only a few things to that. One, of course, he did talk about the official word is United Energy Interface, UEI, like UPI, which allows this peer-to-peer transactions and so forth.
So I can sell you power and I can buy power from you if we're both rooftop generators.
Absolutely, absolutely. The other thing which we hope will also happen is on the distribution part. And that's largely because distribution remains, by and large, we didn't discuss much, the weakest in terms of how it is financially they are. I mean, all of them, Praveer did touch upon the large losses they have. So one of the things which we feel is that gradually distribution companies, or rather the framework should come in a manner which allows large consumers to have open access as a default. So they should be effectively allowed to buy power from anyone by paying the necessary distribution or transmission charges to whoever is the transmission provider. Now, this has a direct impact on how the tariffs are set today, which means that if we allow the industry, because this is important from the point of view of competitiveness of the industry, it's also important if they want to buy clean power and meet export targets, which is becoming more and more pronounced as India wants to become an export-oriented economy also. So we also will need to rationalize the tariffs for the balanced consumers, the residential consumers, the agriculture, and so on and so forth. Agriculture, one important step has already been taken. The government has already segregated the feeder for agriculture pump sets, and which has reaped very good dividends for the states which have done. So I think that will become much more the norm. And the other people should actually become residential consumers. So they will probably have to pay a bit higher pricing compared. But then we have seen, I mean, we all get used to higher petrol prices, higher dal prices, higher onion prices. So the power of electricity increasing incrementally over a 3 or 4 year period will probably not pinch anyone.
All right. Mohit, Praveer, thank you very much for your time. And thank you for joining us on Emerging.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.